Well, folks, thanks for tuning in again. You're getting a bit of a late show here tonight. I've been on the scene live in and around Ottawa for a number of functions and activities that are going on there, but I still want to get this out to you so you've got something here for your daily news that matters, gets you a glimpse behind the scenes. Well, Canadians are finally really happy, or at least the Canadian media is really happy because they're announcing that, guess what? ICE, yes, those notorious immigration folks from the U.S. are in Canada. And this is supposed to send Canadians into shockwaves across the country. Well, in fact, I can tell you when I was Minister of Public Safety at the various embassies and consulates that belong to the U.S., they do have on-site representatives of their own various law agencies, be it the FBI, be it ICE, be it federal policing forces, just as we do in Canadian consulates in the U.S. and around the world. There are intelligence experts from various agencies, law enforcement agencies. And so the Canadian media is trying to get Canadians incensed and get these officials thrown out of Canada. They are not arresting people. They don't have the right or the ability to arrest people. They are there to share intelligence with Canadian officials about dangerous individuals that may be coming across the border and hurting our citizens. But this is, quite a campaign against ICE. Now, keep in mind, along with two tragedies, shootings that happened in Minnesota, very disturbing. These happen and the situations take place. We think things might be moderating a bit in Minnesota. But remember the issue here. ICE, those immigration officials, are required to remove people from the United States who are there illegally and have broken serious laws. This would be sex traffickers. This would be violent abusers. This would be murderers. We're not talking about illegal immigrants who haven't broken the law. These are ones who have broken the law. And in Minnesota, which is the worst state of these, the governor there and the state there decided some time ago they weren't going to allow any, even of the violent illegal immigrants, to be deported out of the country. And so that makes the ICE officials then, they have to try and track down these individuals by looking at where there might be, they get a tip that they're at the mall, or they might go to the homes and have a warrant and try and get access. And so when that starts happening, the various groups, some of the protest groups in the U.S., which are funded by large left-wing funding agencies, many of them from out of country, they then they just go straight on the internet and they say, hey, everybody, send hundreds of people or thousands of people to this address or that address, and let's go there and beat up on ICE officers. So it all stems from the fact that until recently, at least, Minnesota was not doing what was required, and that is with serious offenders, sex traffickers, etc. They weren't allowing ICE just to come to the jails and get these individuals. And it's not just in the state jails, but in municipal and county jails also. Hopefully now with the announcement that about 700 ICE agents are moving out of Minnesota, this is going to help to bring some sanity. But Canadians need to keep in mind, Canadians who are clamoring and going crazy because there's some Canadian businesses that do business with ICE. There's a successful high-tech company in Toronto that sells to agencies around the world, that sells very high-tech equipment that is used in the trafficking, for instance, of drugs and of sex traffickers. And Canadians, being so righteous, are saying this shouldn't happen if they're selling to ICE, and we should penalize Canadian companies for this. So the whole thing is really taken on all kinds of wild proportions here. And along with that, we recognize that there have been two tragedies at least. And if these ICE agents are able to, as in other states, go directly to the jails where the criminals are, this is illegally in the country and have broken serious laws, if they could get access there, you wouldn't have these problems on the street. Let's see if that's going to change. We don't know. Well, China continues and Canada continues to snuggle up all nice and cozy. The present Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, has a policy of really getting quite close and cozy with China. I have no problem with trade with China, but when you're drawing closer or wanting to do special deals with the administration there, that is an extreme cause for concern. China being, of course, one of the worst actors in the world when it comes to the violation of human rights. Well, China has just been effectively kicked off of the Panama Canal. They have a couple of huge companies there at either end of the Panama Canal, and it's always been suspected that China has those there, so if things get really dicey on a global scale, even coming to war, they would use those large sites to be able to blockade, if not stop, trade going through the Panama Canal. The Supreme Court in Panama has just ruled that China has to get out of town. And there's a number of things that went into that ruling. So as more and more countries start to stand up to China, which is the worst violator of human rights on the planet, as more and more countries start to put pressure on them, Canada just has a strategy of warming up closer and cozier to them. So we're asking the federal government, what is your strategy with China? The fact that they are experiencing hardship will always or could potentially lead to the communist state becoming more and more under pressure from its citizens and maybe even fall apart. Canada always seems to be there, or often seems to be there, to bail out countries with atrocious records by making announcements that we're going to do more business with them. Or just before Hamas completely collapsed in Gaza, we had the Canadian government announcing that they would recognize a Palestinian state. So we say to the Canadian government, what is your strategy with China? Why do you get cozier and give them more help and accommodation when other countries, not just the U.S., but other countries, are getting tough on them? It should be explained to Canadians. Well, here in Ottawa, where I am for meetings and also doing this broadcast out of Ottawa, a great event tonight at the Rogers Centre, and it was celebrating and commemorating the 20th anniversary of Stephen Harper's first election as Prime Minister, and then going over the next number of years as Prime Minister, looking at the accomplishments. And we talked about the fact that before the government, the Conservative government, was strangely, in my mind to this day, strangely lost the election to young Trudeau, whose main promise seemed to be the liberation of marijuana smokers and making marijuana free, and not free, but making it legal to be able to sell. Keep in mind that the stats showed that when Stephen Harper left office, Canada had been pointed out by the G20. It's not Canada pointing this out, that middle-class Canadians were the most well-off, the wealthiest middle class anywhere on planet Earth. And that was as a result of tax reductions and balancing the budget, something that hardly any government has done or even seems to want to do. And so there was a grand celebration of all this, and keeping in mind what kind of fiscal policies actually do work for a country. Keeping taxes low, stop borrowing, stop spending borrowed money, which causes for inflation. Some of these basics, if a government would just do them in Canada, things could maybe restore, who knows, to some kind of normality. Well, looking at the markets, U.S. market and Canada market, the TSX, the Toronto Stock Exchange, kind of mirroring what's going on in the U.S. Gold bouncing back up again, silver bouncing back up again. This happens when there's uncertainty in the markets. Certainly has been some of that. But there's mixed signals on the tech stocks. Some tech companies are going up and some are going down. And here's the interesting breakdown. Here's why. The demand for semiconductor chips is so huge with the expansion of AI that it is the big data centers and the big AI centers that are buying most of the chips and most of the conductors. So when that happens, so they're buying it, they have a slightly higher profit margin to do that. So companies, even large tech companies, that, for instance, make and manufacture cell phones, they're experiencing a drop in their value. The share value of those companies is dropping. Why is that? Because since these chips are in so much demand at the huge AI centers, and since these AI companies will pay more for the chips and semiconductors than, let's say, a telephone company will, that's why you see some of the tech companies dropping, those who are relying heavily on the manufacture and sale, for instance, of iPhones, of cell phones. They are dropping because the majority of chips, especially the good chips, are going to the large AI companies. AMD, which is a large chip and semiconductor company, up 17%, and Micron up 7%. Well, one area where we're seeing a drastic drop, is in the company known as Thomson Reuters. Now, Thomson Reuters is an international company, and they basically have in their on their paywall, they have a number of newspapers, well-known newspapers from around the world. They also offer digital services, and they have dropped 31%, 31% this month on the stock market, largely because they can't anymore. They don't get revenue from selling, for instance, their research services, services of analysts, because so much now can be done. If you're a client, you don't want to pay Thomson Reuters or some of their companies the big money to do the research and do their analysis projects. You just go direct to AI itself and you get it done. And that's having significant ramifications for large media companies that were able to charge their clients for doing the research and the analysis, and now those clients can go straight online. Along with that, very interesting to see Eli Lilly, which is, of course, a pharmaceutical company. Their sales have gone, their value has gone up, their stocks have gone up considerably, and it's due to the sale of their weight loss drug. It's just absolutely sweeping the planet. Some people are saying, oh, this is a terrible thing, and all the focus on weight. Listen, people who are losing weight are going to get healthier. And if they're grossly overweight, if they're, have a huge problem that way, and they start to reduce their weight, guess what that means? It means they are less susceptible, for instance, to diabetes, which means kidney problems. So people are getting healthier as they lose weight, and companies like Eli Lilly going up in the marketplace because of the demand for their products. Well, Cuba is continuing to suffer, and many people see that as a good thing, because even though it means some suffering for a period of time for their citizens, it's an exposure of how socialism and communists actually serve to make people poorer overall. And it's just hit in a horrific way in Cuba. Food is increasingly less available. Tourism is the only industry that keeps things going. And Canada is the biggest exporter of tourists to Cuba. The other thing that hit Cuba badly was the Venezuelan oil, of course, is now intercepted. The Venezuelan order coming from really, which is a rogue state of Venezuela, that's being intercepted. So Cuba is having energy problems, they're having water problems, they're having food production problems. And what do you know? Who's the biggest supporter in terms of revenue to Cuba? It's Canadians. So Canadians helping to bail out China, Canadians also linking closer to Cuba. Not really a good look, and it'd be nice to see that turn around. Well, if you watched the Grammys, you would have seen Billie Eilish singing her song about stolen land, and referencing the fact that she thinks the land was all stolen from First Nations folks. I have a couple of questions for Billie. First of all, if you really believe you are living on stolen land, like you actually believe that, why would you not give that land back? I don't think I'm living on stolen land. I'm living on land that I bought and paid for. So I'm not feeling guilty about this, but honestly, if I was really convinced the land I was living on was stolen, I would want to give it back. So these actors that are bemoaning all of this all of this stuff. I wonder if they're willing to just hand their estates back to the First Nations people in their area. They're getting questioned more and more on that, these celebrities who are talking about the stolen land thing when they're being asked, well, why don't you give your land or some of it back? I think you're going to see some announcements. Watch me on this. Let's see if it comes true in the near future, where some wealthy people give chunks of their land, actually gives it to some First Nations indigenous groups. Just the wealthy people do it to satisfy their own consciousness and to look as truly liberal as they want. Let's see what that happens, because there's going to be increasing pressure on people like Billie Eilish and others who are telling us that all the land has been stolen. There'll be increased pressure on them to give up theirs. How could you live on land that was stolen? And then looking at what many First Nations groups are wanting in terms of payment for the land that they say was stolen, there is not a nation or a tribe in the history of Earth that was not warlike and that did not pursue accumulating more land. First Nations were no exception to this. Long before land of theirs was being bought or taken on the U.S. or Mexico side, you had, for instance, the Comanches coming down from the northern Rockies and into the Great Plains, and when they did that, they displaced the Apache. They drove them out of that area. If the Comanche nation gets money from the government because the Comanche saying some of their land was stolen, how much money is the Comanches going to give the Apache nation because the Comanches took over their land, literally stole it from them? That pressure moved the Apache nation down to Mexico, where they attacked and stole and kept some of the land that belonged to the Pueblo tribes. In Canada, it was the Iroquois versus the Algonquin. Vicious attacks on the Algonquin from the Iroquois. And up north, the Inuit, of course, famously at war with and many times attacking and taking away the products and even the women from the Cree and Dene nations. So how are they going to be, in fact, restored, or what kind of payback is there going to be to them who had their lands stolen, literally stolen by other First Nation groups? And you can go back to the year 1000 BC, or in the common, 1000 AD, or as we say, CE, in the Common Era. And you have the Thule tribe, and yes, that's spelt the same way as your ski rack, Thule. The Thule tribe moving from what we would today call Canada, moving east to, guess where? Greenland. So we think Donald Trump has plans for Greenland. The Thule tribe, about 1,000 years, about the year 1000, displaced the Dorset tribes in Greenland. Who's going to help pay the Dorsets for what their indigenous cousins did to them? This is getting this is getting complicated, folks. So I would say to Billie Eilish, sing us a tune, Billie, on when you're going to be giving back your land that you said was stolen. Billie, you've got a huge and a beautiful estate. I don't begrudge you that at all. I'm glad you're doing well, but telling the rest of us that we're on stolen land is a little bit rich. Well, you've probably heard of Christopher Nolan, a very famous director. He directed movies like Batman and Dunkirk and Oppenheimer, and he's also the director of the head of the Actors Guild of America. He's bemoaning the fact that Hollywood itself seems to be declining in terms of opportunity and certainly in terms of viewership. And one of the reasons, like he's saying, in the TV industry, is jobs are down about 35%. In the film industry, they're down another 12%. And one of the reasons, and we talked about this on the show 2 days ago, YouTubers are able to amazingly self-finance some of their own films and produce their own films with the help of video generation, and they're doing a pretty good job of it, and they're getting good audiences at the theaters. And so for the first time, really, we're seeing Hollywood having to compete. They're not used to that, so they're not doing too well, and they're losing opportunities certainly this is according to the Actors Guild, they're losing opportunities. Well, this is also interesting because today, just today, was the 50th anniversary of, guess what? The Muppets. I don't know if you saw their 50th anniversary show. And yes, there was Kermit the Frog and Miss Piggy. And you know what? They didn't look like they'd aged a bit. Sabrina Carpenter was kind of hosting the whole thing. This was a one-off special to see how it would go. Got 100% ratings on Rotten Tomatoes. And it's going to be interesting now to see. People are speculating this. It's kind of a test for them. Could it be a signal? Could we see the Muppets returning, that very popular series? The other message it's sending back to Hollywood is that non-woke rules, non-woke productions seem to get a lot more support and fan base than the woke production with all the strange messages about gender transformation and everything else that seem to weave through everything that comes out of Hollywood. Here it seems that non-woke seems to rule. So I would say, wake up, Hollywood. Kermit the Frog is coming for you, and he's not going to be making an announcement that he's trans. He's just Kermit the Frog, and people seem to be happy with that. Well, the Supreme Court in Northern Ireland has just ruled that curriculum in the public education system there is unlawful. It's unconstitutional. And it's because it's been revealed, I guess people weren't aware of it, that things like creation were referred to in a positive light, and words like gift of God and God being presented in a positive way. That was taken to court. That whole notion was taken to court by a father who his young daughters were wanting to say grace before the meal. They were wanting to thank God for the food. This guy got really torqued, got really upset about that, went and filed with the Supreme Court, said these kids were learning this stuff at school, and he wanted it to stop. And the Supreme Court has ruled with him. So it's going to be very interesting to see as more and more, we see it in Canada, we see it in the US, we see government agencies and governments themselves trying to legislate the expression, positive expressions of God, positive expressions of Christ. They're trying to regulate it out, legislate it out, and in fact adjudicate it out in the courts. Let's see where that really goes. Along the lines of what's happening in the faith world, Open Doors US is a major publication that studies the effects and the order of magnitude of persecution of Christians around the globe, and they've just come out with their annual report, and they say persecution is at an all-time high in terms of actual peoples persecuted in a year. It's gone way up. They estimate 338 million people facing direct persecution. And they produce a list of the 50 worst countries. North Korea, of course, is at the top and the worst in terms of religious persecution. My wife actually was able to go there a couple years ago with a group that gets in regularly into North Korea because they bring soy product in. They bring it in by the container load, and then they convert it to milk, and they're able to feed thousands of school children that the great, wonderful leader is not able to feed. Anyway, North Korea, number one on the persecution of Christians. China's in there at number 17 among the top 50 worst, and there we are again. We never criticize China for their terrible record on human rights. Cuba is in the list of top 50. They're number 24, and there we are as Canadians supporting Cuba. I guess we think that's okay, but we wouldn't dare want to go and take our dollars to the United States. So kind of interesting to see the stats on that. And the Christian Chronicle magazine has just published an article, and it's talking about the Venezuelan Christians. This is Venezuela, which is falling apart and where there's all kinds of awful things. And of course, Maduro just got, let's say, apprehended by the United States there. The Venezuelan Christians, there's a number of them, quite a number. They say it's in the low millions that have come into the States, are in many areas the main reason for Christian revival in the churches in the U.S. because the persecution and the hardships being faced by the Christians in Venezuela, then those who escape, they bring their faith, their rejuvenated faith with them, and they're actually firing up and encouraging churches in the new countries in which they find themselves. Fascinating stuff, folks. Thanks a lot for tuning in. Give me your comments. We'll catch you tomorrow.